I signed a 12-month lease on a house in Townsville, in North Queensland, before I ever laid eyes on it from my kitchen table in Ohio, on a gray February afternoon, clicking I agree on a place I'd only ever seen in 8 photos. Before I tell you how it went for me, it'd be great if you'd take a second to subscribe and hit that thumbs up. That way, we stay in touch. If you've ever sat at your own kitchen table with a listing open in one tab and your nerve in the other, this one's for you. Because I know exactly how that feels. Let me back up to that afternoon. Snow on the sill, the furnace ticking, and me, 60-something years old, about to promise a full year of my life to a house on the other side of the planet that I had never stood inside. A 12-month lease, not a weekend rental you can walk away from. A year. My buddies back home said I'd lost my marbles, and honestly, part of me agreed with them. Because here's what I thought I was signing up for. Every rental listing tells the same good lie. You know the one. The wide-angle lens that makes a shoebox look like a ballroom. The fresh coat of paint slapped right over the water stain. The ocean glimpse that turns out to be a 6-inch sliver of blue between 2 neighbors' roofs, if you stand on your toes. I'd rented enough places in my life to know that trick cold, so I braced myself. I figured I'd open that door to a bare little unit that smelled of somebody else's cigarettes. Chipped counter. A window looking at a wall. The kind of place that makes you count the months till you can leave. And those 8 photos, I'd studied them like a detective. A front room with a couch pushed to one wall. A kitchen shot from the doorway. A bathroom, a bedroom, a hallway. The front of the house from the street, and 2 that were just a fence and a patch of grass. 8. That was the entire window I had into a year of my life. You can zoom in all you want. The camera only ever shows you what somebody pointed it at. And the rent? $390 Australian dollars a week. That's about $255 US dollars. Less than half what a plain apartment cost me back home. I read that figure 3 times to be sure the decimal was sitting in the right spot. Now, be honest with yourself for a second. If you saw a place that cheap, wouldn't your first thought be exactly what mine was? Where's the catch? A house, not a unit, a yard of my own, $255 a week. My gut said nobody just hands that over. There had to be something wrong with it that 8 photos would never show me. Mold behind the walls, a highway roaring out front, something, and look, I'll be straight with you. The only reason that gamble didn't blow up in my face is that I'd done a pile of quiet homework first. How do you actually rent a place safely from the other side of the world without getting fleeced or locked into a lease you can't crawl out of? That's a real question, and nobody hands you the answer. So I put everything I learned the hard way into one place, a guide I call One Way Guide. The Sight Unseen Renting Playbook. How to read a listing you can't walk through, what to check before you sign, all the stuff nobody tells you about leasing in Australia from your own kitchen table. If that's the wall you're staring at right now, scan the code on screen or grab the link in the description. It's the map I wish I'd had that February afternoon. But homework only takes you so far. It couldn't tell me what was actually behind that door. And I wanted out of Ohio that was the real engine under all of it. You know, the winter up there, the sky goes gray around November and just stays. Months of it. Salt on the roads, gloves you can never find, and that same tired arithmetic every retiree does at the kitchen table, heating bill up, pension flat, and the sun, a rumor you half remember from July. I'd run those numbers 100 times, and they never once got easier. Somewhere in there I stopped wanting to be careful. I wanted warmth. I wanted to eat breakfast outside in the middle of what, back home, was a blizzard. So I signed. I hit send. And the second the confirmation popped up, there was no unsigning it. Then came the 14-hour flight across the Pacific. 14 hours over black water, everybody around me asleep, and me wide awake with one question turning over and over like a stone in my pocket. What did those 8 photos leave out, the good stuff or the bad? I trusted a stranger's camera with a whole year of my life, and now I was strapped into a metal tube chasing that decision at 500 miles an hour with nothing left to do about it. Then the wheels came down. North Queensland out the window, flat green, blinding after all that gray Ohio light. Heat coming up off the runway in waves you could actually see. I collected my bag. I signed for a little hire car at a counter with a girl who called me Love. And just like that, I was there. The plane was down, the hire car keys were in my hand, and the only thing left between me and the answer was a road north into a town I had never once stood in the house, third on the left, a key I hadn't touched, and 8 photos I no longer trusted. That road north I took it at about noon, a little hire car that smelled of somebody else's air freshener. A whole year of my life bet on a town rolling past the windshield for the very first time. And then the light hit me. Not the inside of anything yet, just the light. This salt-bright glare coming off the water, the kind that goes flat and gray in a photo, but out here, it fills the whole windshield and makes you squint. I drove past the surf life-saving flags on the strand, red and yellow, snapping in the breeze, and a couple of kids already out in the shallows before I'd even found my street. 8 photos. That's all I'd ever seen of this place. 8 little rectangles on my laptop, back at my kitchen table in Ohio, on a gray February afternoon. And now the real thing was going by at 40 miles an hour, and it was so much bigger and brighter than any screen ever showed me. Then something small happened. Something I still think about, 4 years on. A bloke in his driveway watering his lawn in the heat. As I rolled past, he lifted 2 fingers off the garden hose and waved at me. A total stranger in a rental car he'd never laid eyes on. Didn't know me from Adam. Just 2 fingers up, a little nod, and back to his lawn. Tell me you've felt that. The first small sign a place is going to be all right. That was mine, before I'd even parked the car. A man I will never meet again told me more about this town in half a second than 8 photos and a 12-month lease ever could. My street was quiet. One of those streets where you can hear a lawnmower 3 houses down and not much else. Low-set houses, most of them, sitting close to the ground the way they build them up here so the air can move underneath. I counted them off as I crawled along. First on the left, second, and the house third on the left, that one was mine. Or it was about to be. Low tin roof, going warm and almost silver in the 2 o'clock sun. A little veranda out front, a step up off the grass. And I just sat there a second with the engine ticking, looking at a house I had legally agreed to live in for a year and had never once stood inside. Now, Deb. I have to tell you about Deb, because up to this point Deb was only a voice. The landlady. We'd done the whole thing by phone and by text me in Ohio, her somewhere on the far side of the planet, a year of my life, going back and forth in little gray bubbles on a screen. Silver bob, reading glasses she was forever pushing up onto the top of her head. I'd learn all that later. But the voice I knew already, warm, unhurried. A woman who was calling me love by the second phone call. And here's the thing that made me start to trust her. Her last text, the day before I flew out, I must have read it 6 times on the plane. It said, and I quote it exactly, "Keys under the frangipani pot on the veranda. Love, let yourself in." That was it. No lockbox code, no property manager waiting to shake my hand, no office, no 3 forms to initial, keys under the pot, let yourself in. And I'll be honest with you, a part of my careful old American brain read that and thought, is that for real? Is anybody actually that easy about handing over a house to a man they've never met? So I climbed up onto the veranda. And there it was. The frangipani pot, a fat terracotta thing with a little tree in it, a few pale flowers on the ground around it. I tipped it back on its edge, and underneath, there was the key. Exactly where she said. Right where a stranger's voice on a telephone had promised it would be. A small thing. A key under a pot. But it was the very first piece of this whole gamble that turned out to be true. Deb was real. The pot was real. And that easy open trust that was real too. So let me do the arithmetic with you, right here on the porch, because this is where it all came down to plain numbers. The rent was $390 Australian dollars a week. That's about $255 US. Real figure, straight off my lease. Less than half of what a plain little apartment had been costing me back home. My budget said I could carry it and still breathe easy. So 3 things were suddenly true, all at once. The number was real. It cleared what I could afford. And here I actually was, standing on the veranda of it, the key warming up in my hand. But here's the whole knot of it. The inside was still a complete mystery. Everything I'd trusted so far was on the outside of that door. The wave, the pot, the voice, the number. Behind the door sat the one thing I still had no proof of whether those 8 photos had told me the truth, or told me the good lie that every rental listing in the world tells. So I slid the key into the lock. Right here, if your stomach just tightened a little with mine, good. That's exactly where I was standing. Because this was the moment. This was the second the whole thing either paid off or fell apart. A year of rent riding on it. A 14-hour flight across the Pacific behind me. A house I'd only ever seen as 8 rectangles on a laptop. All of it came down to whatever waited on the other side of this one door. My heart was going. I don't mind telling you, 60-odd years old, standing on a stranger's veranda, my hand shaking just a little on that key. I turned it. I pushed the door open and I stopped dead, because the thing that hit me was not the inside at all. The inside I'll get to. It was what the whole house was quietly hiding behind it that I never saw coming. The inside was fine, plain, honest, exactly the bare little place I'd braced for beige walls. A kitchen that had done its time. A couch that came with the lease. Nothing to write home about. And for half a second I almost laughed out loud, standing there in the hallway, because that was the whole gamble right in front of me, looking about as dull as I'd feared it would. Then I looked past it. The whole rear wall was glass. One long sheet of it, floor to ceiling, taking the whole back of the house and turning it into a window. And beyond that glass, the yard opened up green and a little wild. And right in the middle of it stood a mango tree, branches bowing with fruit, actually bent down toward the ground, heavy the way a tree gets when nobody's had the heart to pick it clean. If you're sitting there staring at a listing right now, feeling that same pull and that same fear, I want you to really picture this next part. I slid that glass door open. And the air came in. That's the thing, the air. A breeze came straight off Cleveland Bay. You could taste the salt sitting on your lip, and underneath the salt was the green smell of eucalyptus after the afternoon shower, that clean wet leaf smell that goes right into your chest. The rain had just rolled through. The whole yard was steaming a little in the 2 o'clock sun, and somewhere over the fence a lawnmower was going, and I stood in that doorway breathing like a man who'd been holding it in for 14 hours over the Pacific. Which, near enough, I had. None of that was in the photos. It couldn't be. I walked back into the kitchen, and there was a bowl sitting on the bench. Ripe mangoes, a good dozen of them, gold and red and soft down at the stem, and propped up against that bowl a little note in blue pen. Deb the landlady, silver bob, reading glasses always shoved up on top of her head, had let herself in ahead of me and left it there. It said, "Welcome home, pick as many as you like, they'll only rot otherwise." Welcome home. To a fella she'd never once met, from a woman I'd only ever traded a few text messages with. I stood there holding that little scrap of paper a good deal longer than I'll admit to you. And that's when it landed on me, the thing I've been chewing on ever since. You can photograph a wall. You can photograph a benchtop, a bathroom, the one good corner of a room with a wide-angle lens doing its little lie. But the one thing sight unseen can't fake is the air. The camera got the walls and missed the life. 8 photos, and not one of them could carry the salt off the bay, or that heavy tree, or a stranger leaving fruit out on your bench, because otherwise it'd only go to waste. Now remember the catch. The whole flight over, I was certain of it. $390 Australian a week, call it about 255 US, for a whole house when a plain apartment back in Ohio was running me more than double that. My gut kept saying cheap means something's wrong. There's a flaw buried in here somewhere the pictures are hiding. There wasn't. The catch wasn't a flaw at all. It was a gift the photos simply couldn't carry. The rent wasn't low because the place was broken. It was low because the thing that made it priceless, the air, the tree, the water just down the road, doesn't show up on a listing. So nobody's out there bidding it up. I'd braced myself for a con. What I got was a bargain nobody had the words to put in the ad. 4 years on, I still eat breakfast under that mango tree. Same spot every morning. Plate on the little table, coffee going cold because I keep forgetting to drink it, my feet up on the other chair. And the cockatoos screech themselves absolutely silly in those branches at dawn, a great white racket of them, loud enough to wake the whole street, and I wouldn't swap it for quiet if you paid me. The tree still bows with fruit every single summer. I still can't eat them fast enough to keep up. Deb was right about that part. Now let me be straight with you, because I promised you honest. It's hot up north. Townsville in the middle of February will find every drop of sweat you've got, that part's real, and I'll show you how I handle it another day. And yes, putting my name to a place I'd never stood in took more nerve than just about anything I'd done in years. My hand actually hovered over that mouse a while. But here's how it all shook out. Cheaper than home, greener than I ever once pictured from that gray kitchen table back in Ohio. And kinder by a country mile than the worst-case story I'd been telling myself the whole way across the ocean. I braced for the good lie every listing tells. What I got was the one plain truth a listing can never hold. So run your own numbers with me for a second, because what scared me is smaller than you think, and what it buys is bigger than any camera can show you. 390 Australian dollars a week. That's the number that had my heart going out there on the veranda. That's the number I was dead certain was hiding a catch. Write it down. Sit with it a moment. Whatever a comfortable place is costing you back home right this minute, hold it up next to that, and then remember it comes with a mango tree bowing to the ground and salt air rolling in off Cleveland Bay, and a woman down the road who'll leave fruit on your bench before she's even shaken your hand. The fear at the kitchen table is real. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it isn't, but the number is smaller than the fear makes it out to be, and the life on the far side of that door is a whole lot bigger than 8 photos ever let on. I signed for a house I had never laid eyes on, $390 a week, and it bought me a life the camera never even caught. So if you're staring at your own listing tonight with your own coffee going cold, you know what I'm going to say. Go turn the key.